I'm gonna invite you to my wedding with George. I'll make sure to show off our happiness to you. After a long marriage, George suddenly told me he wanted a divorce. I was confused, of course, I objected, but George was adamant. It seems like Kimberly wants to steal my husband and rub despair in my face. She told me with a smug tone filled with malice. Hit with the unbelievable news that my ex-best friend and ex-husband were marrying, I froze, flooded with all sorts of emotions. I'll go instead of Mom. I'll show him hell. To cheer me up, the children told me that they were going to the wedding on their own. My name is Susan Miller. I'm a 50-year-old housewife, and it'll be almost 30 years since I got married. I met George at the same company where I started working right after I graduated high school. George, 5 years older than me, was already highly valued by the company. Despite his youth, he was trusted by the company and was an elite candidate for section chief. I often supported George in my clerical role, and we gradually started to chat. We clicked because we were both serious and had similar interests, and it wasn't long before we got married. Then, as it wasn't unusual for women to leave their jobs after marriage at that time, and with George's encouragement, I became a housewife. Since then, I dedicated myself to making sure our family had a comfortable home life. I kept our house spick and span, studied to make delicious and nutritious meals, and strived to keep everyone healthy and happy. We had 2 kids, and as George and I raised them, our bond seemed to deepen. After some truly hectic parenting, our kids grew up to be wonderful people. Our daughter, Meg, landed a job in sales at a large corporation, and there's even talk of her going on business trips abroad. She speaks English, German, and French, which makes her a reassuring choice for international work. She's eager and loves to learn, so she seems happy at her job. Our son, Oliver, is a college student aiming to become a surgeon, and right now, he's studying hard for his medical board exams. He's also working out to build up his strength, which has made him quite robust, very reassuring. I was happy spending my days with a trusted husband and kind and honest children. But one day, 2 years ago, George suddenly brought up divorce. I was looking forward to planning our retirement together once the kids were independent, so the sudden proposal caught me completely off guard. Divorce? What's going on, all of a sudden? George isn't much of a talker, and he's not one for jokes. So I knew that his wish for a divorce was genuine. We had our fights over the years, but we always made up. What could have been so wrong? I wanted to spend the rest of my life with George, so I asked him, confusedly, for a reason. It doesn't matter why. I just want a divorce. But no matter how much I asked, George refused to give me a reason for the divorce, insisting on it uncompromisingly. Reluctant to divorce without a clear reason, we had countless discussions. George remained stubborn no matter how many times I asked him about this, so the kids and I had a family meeting together. Even then, George didn't give a clear reason. I'm tired of being married to you. Irreconcilable differences or something should suffice. With George talking so flippantly, I couldn't understand what my husband was thinking anymore. He had always been a serious man, taking care of his family despite his busy job. Yet here he was, just wanting a divorce. His apparent indifference to the family made me feel disappointed. I, too, thought that I could no longer stay with George. The kids seemed just as stunned by their father's sudden change. And so, the divorce was settled, and George packed his things and left the house a year ago. When I felt a touch of loneliness after George left so easily, the kids reassured me that they were on my side. We'll always be with you, Mom. You're better off not worrying about Dad anymore. I was feeling anxious about this divorce with no given reasons, but knowing the kids were on my side lifted my spirits. I realized I couldn't just wallow in sadness. We had decided on divorce, but finalizing it was another story. George was stubborn about not giving up his custody rights to the kids. They're kind-hearted and smart, I guess no parent would want to let go, even George. But the kids are adults now. They can handle themselves and chose to be by my side, every time turning down George's attempts at claiming custody. Still, George persisted. I kept wondering, how long will this back and forth last? In the midst of it all, I bumped into Kimberly, my childhood buddy. We lived close by and hung out together almost all the way through high school. Having been the quiet and shy type, Kimberly was practically the only friend I had. She was known for her beauty, always the bright and sociable one, making her the darling of the school. I liked her a lot, proud to call her my best friend, expecting our bond would last forever. But after starting our jobs, she began to drop snide remarks more and more. I thought I was imagining things until she badmouthed my wedding and dress when I invited her. "I can't believe you're getting married before me, but then again, your guy is just some corporate drone, so of course, it's a budget wedding." She laughed mockingly and kept the insults coming. Kimberly used to play with me and be kind to me. But before I knew it, he started looking down on me. I didn't want to believe it, but it wasn't just me, she belittled George too, and that really got under my skin. I played it cool back then to avoid stirring the pot, but I decided to distance myself from someone so outright disrespectful. Kimberly had gotten hitched too, so we hadn't crossed paths for a while until about 3 years ago when she moved into my neighborhood. I'd sometimes bump into her while running errands. "You still look plain as usual. I feel sorry for you because you have a child and can't do what you like." I was tired of being criticized every time. Kimberly doesn't have any children, but she seemed to want to look down on me and say that because she doesn't have children, she can do whatever she wants. Furthermore, she was wearing heavy makeup and flashy clothes that didn't suit her age, which made me feel uncomfortable. In the past, she was praised for being idol-like, but these days there is no trace of that. However, Kimberly still seems to think that she is beautiful and brags about it. Kimberly said this with a proud look on her face. "I'm remarrying. After all, men are attracted to good women like me." Kimberly looked down on me, her lipstick turning poisonous red, and she smiled. After Kimberly moved into the neighborhood, I heard that George and Kimberly were seen together, and I had a bad feeling about it. Kimberly's been married 2 or 3 times now, but they've all ended in divorce. Our parents still get along and live nearby, so I've heard about her matrimonial track record from them. The first time, he was a high-income office worker, but apparently he was busy with work and didn't spend much time at home. Apparently, Kimberly took advantage of this by playing around and wasting her money instead of doing housework properly. When her husband found out, he divorced her. The second time was with a man who had inherited a long-established Japanese confectionery shop. Apparently, this was a timid person who didn't know much about anything other than making sweets, and Kimberly seemed to take advantage of him as well. It seems that he was unable to stop Kimberly from doing whatever she wanted, but when he learned that Kimberly was stealing money from the store, he became furious. Furthermore, Kimberly even had an affair, so they divorced and paid a lot of alimony. Apparently, Kimberly's parents paid the alimony on behalf of Kimberly, who had been playing around and had no savings. The third person was my boyfriend when I was a student. This man, who was the son of a landowner, was my first lover, but he dumped me, saying he had fallen in love with Kimberly. At the time, Kimberly was beautiful and popular, so I thought it couldn't be helped. However, in hindsight, after I introduced him to Kimberly as my lover, Kimberly's contact with my lover increased. Thinking hard about it, I started to wonder if Kimberly had stolen him from me on purpose. They dated for a while before parting ways, but as adults, they reconnected and got married. This person's family is rich, but they also farm with their family, making use of their large amount of land, and apparently they got into a fight with Kimberly, who didn't want to help with the farming. She said she couldn't tolerate such a life and they ended up getting divorced. Knowing Kimberly's tendency to go after wealthy men and do as she pleased, the rumors of her and George together gave me an uneasy feeling. But I was older now and thought I shouldn't worry about infidelity and tried not to think about it. When Kimberly announced she was getting remarried, all these memories came flooding back. However, he thought again, and was surprised that there were still people like Kimberly who would marry someone like him. A few days later, Kimberly suddenly came to my house. When I opened the door, not expecting Kimberly to come, I froze in surprise, and Kimberly said to me, "You have 2 children, right? Please let me meet them quickly." For some reason, Kimberly wanted to see my children, and I replied in a confused and almost trembling voice. "Today is a weekday. I'm not home due to work and school." I had never mentioned my kids to Kimberly, nor had she ever met them. So I was puzzled about what she could possibly want with them. As I hesitated with my response, Kimberly looked disappointed but invited herself in anyway. Even though I stopped her, she started relaxing on the sofa, telling me to treat her well since she came all the way. She kept saying I should entertain her, and out of obligation, I just served some tea. Then Kimberly sat on the sofa, chatting away incessantly. She seemed thrilled about her latest marriage. Nearly all she talked about was singing praises of her new spouse. I just nodded along absent-mindedly, But as I listened to the details about her latest partner, something didn't sit right with me. He's the general manager of the same workplace, and he's very wealthy. He's very serious and usually has a big smile on his face, but when I talk to him, he seems happy. The details Kimberly shared about her workplace, her fiancé's position, and their stories matched almost exactly with those of George. Once I realized this, I couldn't stay calm inside. However, I knew if Kimberly saw me rattled, she'd likely gloat even more with snide remarks. I made a conscious effort to appear untroubled, graciously interacting with her until she had said her piece and left. And when Kimberly left and closed the front door, I staggered back into the living room from mental exhaustion and sat down in a chair to collapse. The sudden visit and the suspicion that George might be Kimberly's new husband filled me with all sorts of emotions, and I took a deep breath to calm myself down. Apart from some communication about custody matters coming through the kids' smartphones, my life carried on as usual until one day. Meg came home from work looking ashen and tense, holding a piece of mail in her hands. "What happened?" I asked, surprised at the unusual expression on Meg's face, who doesn't usually get upset. "Mom, I received something like this, and the contents are..." What she showed me was an invitation to a wedding. Written on the invitation was something unbelievable. It said that George and Kimberly were getting married. Meg seemed shocked. She hadn't expected our divorced father to remarry so soon. I felt a jolt too, despite my suspicions. Seeing both of their names there was startling. The atmosphere at home turned bizarre as Oliver came back and expressed disbelief upon seeing the invitation. We couldn't understand what they were thinking by sending us this invite. Just then, the home phone rang, and on the other end was Kimberly. "Did you get my wedding invitation? I thought I'd share our happiness with you." Then, she started boasting about how she met my husband. "Isn't it weird that someone like you would get a well-paid husband? Also, George realized that I'm a better woman than you." Kimberly only bragged and insulted me, then hung up on me. I was aware of Kimberly's bad personality, but I never expected her to go this far. Her malice towards me was unimaginable, leaving me in a state of shock. I was shocked because I didn't think that George was having an affair with Kimberly, but at the same time I was satisfied that George didn't say the reason for the divorce. Listening in on Kimberly's loud voice from the phone, my children became furious. They don't know much about Kimberly. I only briefly told them that since Kimberly moved in, we used to be best friends, but now we don't get along and our relationship has deteriorated. However, the abuse over the phone was not only abusive, but also had a hint of spite in its voice, so they were angry at Kimberly and comforted me. "That lady from earlier is out of line with common sense. Mom didn't do anything wrong, so how could she say such bad things about you? Dad is also an idiot for falling in love with such an evil woman." Seeing my children angry on my behalf brought tears to my eyes. Overwhelmed by everything that had happened, I let out all the stories of Kimberly's past misdeeds and her history of marriages to my children. After getting it all out, I felt a bit lighter. Let's not get involved anymore and skip the wedding. Dealing with them just wears us out. Reflecting on it, I realized how much Kimberly had changed from our childhood days. When she was young, she wasn't mean but kind, so this change made me feel sad somehow. After settling down from the initial shock and regretting burdening the kids with such unpleasant news, they looked at each other with resolved faces and said, "I'll go in Mom's place." I can't stay silent after hearing this much. I'm going to show them hell. Since the invitation included my children and me, there would be no problem if they went without me. They exchanged meaningful glances, and although I was curious about their intentions, I didn't stop them. The wedding itself was likely chosen by Kimberly for its opulence. It was taking place in the most upscale hotel around here. There was a large guest list as well, and I couldn't help thinking it was unnecessary, at their age, to have such a grand event. Since the wedding was announced, George had been increasing his attempts to discuss custody. With a new marriage on the horizon, he needed to settle the custody before the divorce. George desperately wanted the kids to side with him, but they firmly refused, and I wasn't about to let the custody go either. Eventually, George gave in, and the divorce was finalized. Finally, the day of the wedding arrived. My kids got dressed up, determined to face George and Kimberly, and left home spiritedly. They returned a few hours later with satisfied smiles. "They went through hell so funny. It was their own fault," they said with satisfaction and showed me videos they'd taken at the wedding and telling me what had happened. It seemed that in the dressing room, Kimberly was overjoyed that they had attended. "I'm glad you could make it. You can call me Mom now, you know." It appeared that Kimberly was convinced she'd earned the motherhood role over these exceptional kids thanks to winning custody with George. Kimberly seemed happy as she tried to hug my kids, who subtly kept their distance. She was extremely friendly even though we had never met before. I don't know how she ever got married. I can understand why she got divorced. They said as if they were taken aback by Kimberly's attitude. Kimberly had been married but had no children, and it seemed her fear of not being able to have any as she aged had sent her into a panic. Furthermore, since my kids were both accomplished, she was especially happy, thinking of them as her own. In stark contrast to Kimberly, George appeared to be in a very sour mood. His face was stern, he was even less talkative than usual and seemed quite cold. They made only brief greetings before quickly leaving the room. At the ceremony and reception, Kimberly made an entrance in an off-the-shoulder princess-line dress. Even in the video, the dress was clearly too flamboyant and didn't suit her, confusing some of the guests. However, Kimberly seemed to be under the impression that she looked fabulous, bearing a confidently happy smile. I was taken aback by Kimberly's incongruous sense of style and values. It was quite off-putting for someone her age. Although there were many guests at the reception, including people from George's company, the atmosphere wasn't particularly celebratory. It seemed more complicated than cheerful. Only Kimberly seemed out of place, happily bustling about. Regardless, the wedding proceeded, and Kimberly stepped out at one point for a dress change. That's when my children decided to take action. First, Oliver went up on stage. With George looking puzzled and the crowd becoming uneasy, Oliver spoke out boldly. "Congrats on your wedding, Dad. I wasn't expecting such a lavish ceremony. Really impressive of you to pull it off." The crowd, initially puzzled, warmed up when my son congratulated his father. But the mood quickly froze over. The reason was that Oliver exposed how George had an affair with Kimberly, leading to sudden divorce announcements, and he revealed Kimberly's past misadventures. George stood up in shock, lending credibility to Oliver's words, and the crowd started murmuring even louder, unconcerned with the reactions around him. Oliver continued. He began explaining how Kimberly seduced George into the affair that led to their divorce. She had entered George's workplace as a part-timer, lied about still being close friends with me, and gained George's trust. Then she lied and told George that I was saying bad things about him. She said she showed me that I was bad-mouthing George and complaining about him on social media, but I don't use social media. Kimberly had created a fake account, posted derogatory comments about George to stir his suspicion, and eroded the trust he had in me. She also took advantage of a vulnerable George with her advances, successfully luring him away as part of her vindictive satisfaction. What targeted George was harassment against me. Even though Kimberly got divorced because of her own selfishness, she didn't show any remorse. Then, when she learned that I was married to a high-income elite man and had 2 children, both of whom were excellent, and we were still living a happy life, she wanted to destroy my happiness. It seemed she looked down on me in the past for hovering around her. Because of that, she didn't seem to like me because I was living a better life than him. As Oliver revealed the truth, George, perhaps out of anger, began trembling with quiet fury. Amidst this, Kimberly, having finished her costume change, returned to the reception. Dressed in a pastel pink flower dress with a tiara on her head, she entered with a smile. The outfit was cute, but it didn't suit her. It was not met with applause and surveyed the eerily silent room. That's when Meg spoke out cheerily. "Now for a surprise gift from us. Please look at the screen." A video started to play. It was a video letter featuring all 3 of Kimberly's ex-husbands. They appeared to have remarried, with children, and they were all smiling and began to share their stories. As they spoke about their reasons for divorcing Kimberly, she frantically tried to stop the video, but Oliver blocked her, letting the video play. The first husband, the company employee, had remarried and now had 3 children. He had started his own business and become a CEO. He is now living in a luxurious house, and seems to be living like the rich man that Kimberly dreams of living. The second husband, the confectionery shop owner, had also remarried and had 3 children. With his new wife's help, the shop had grown and gained more fame. And now, they seem to have expanded to the 3rd store and are making a considerable profit. The son of a 3rd landowner also remarried and has 2 children. With the help of his second marriage partner, he started a company dealing with agriculture and land, which has now grown into a large corporation, and he seems to be working as its president. All three of them, after parting ways with Kimberly, remarried and found success with their new partners, leading happy lives. Kimberly couldn't stand the fact that all her ex-partners became wealthy and happy with children after separating from her. Frustrated, she clenches her fists, grits her teeth, and her eyes grow bloodshot. This is ridiculous. None of them had achieved such success when they were with me. Kimberly starts to lose control and becomes hysterical. At almost 60 years old, George can't have a better life than this. I also want to live in a big house and be the wife of a president. She continues to complain and argue with a furious George. So, you deceived me, huh? Because of you, my life has turned into a mess. You even said terrible things to Susan. George is filled with anger and regret for being deceived by Kimberly. Amidst their heated argument, Meg, in a loud voice, adds, "We have a special guest too. Please enter." An unfamiliar man enters the venue. Overwhelmed by the atmosphere, the man seems timid and enters while trembling. Surprisingly, this man is Kimberly's current boyfriend. Not only she stole my father, but she also cheated on him. It's unbelievable, right? Meg exposes Kimberly's infidelity, and shocked, the man ignores Kimberly's calls and rushes out of the venue. The guests are appalled, and due to Kimberly and George's fight, the wedding is cancelled. I won't marry you. I'll sue you for the wedding expenses and compensation. I can't pay such a huge amount. Don't abandon me. George demands compensation from Kimberly, and with no money, Kimberly clings to George. Witnessing the scene, the children decide to leave, but George, struggling to free himself from Kimberly's grasp, tells me that he wants to apologize. I accused you without reason and said terrible things. It's not enough to apologize, but at least I want to apologize to Susan. With a face filled with regret, George desperately expresses his feelings. Seeing their father in such a state, the children also have their own thoughts. Right now, Dad is outside. If Mom is okay with it, could we meet him? If you don't want to, we can send him away. You don't have to force yourself. Concerned about me and worried about their father, the children express their thoughts, and I decide to meet their father after giving it some thought. Based on the content of the video and the information from the children, it seems that George is reflecting on his actions, so I thought I would at least listen to his apology. When I go outside, I see George in tattered clothes due to Kimberly clinging on to him. He looked relieved when I showed up and bowed his head. I'm really sorry. I couldn't believe you. You supported me all this time, and I hurt you. I'm sorry. George apologized, his voice choked with tears. As George seemed genuinely remorseful and considering the fact that he was also a victim, I accepted his apology. Upon accepting the apology, George made a suggestion. Is it possible to regain the lost trust? I won't doubt you anymore. Can we be together again? George asked, but I had no intention of remarriage with him. I was still shocked, and my affection for George had faded since he asked for a divorce. I will accept your apology, but I won't remarry you. No matter how remorseful you are, I can't trust you anymore. Saying that, I declined his proposal and walked into the house. Afterward, since some of my colleagues at work had witnessed the whole situation, Kimberly lost their trust and got fired. It was only natural since she had been having an affair within the company. After losing her job, Kimberly is apparently working part-time at another place to repay the compensation money. However, due to her lack of skill and being hysterical, she is being avoided by people. She tried to get people to help her by pretending to be someone she was not, but they told her she was disgusting, and she became even more disliked by people. Kimberly, who believed she was beautiful even in her 50s, finally began to see reality. As for George, he was initially up for a promotion, but it was cancelled, and he ended up getting demoted. However, he is still paying child support until Oliver graduates despite his reduced income. Although I feel sorry for George, thinking that none of this would have happened if it weren't for Kimberly, I can't help but hope he won't be deceived again in the future. As for myself, I am living peacefully with my children. I am encouraged by the fact that they cheerfully tell me that they will provide for me, although I do not want to be a nuisance to my children in my old age. While expressing gratitude to my caring children, I hope to continue living in peace without any disturbances like this incident.